This week, we welcome Matt Coose, founder and CEO at Qmulos, to discuss what smart CISOs and mature organizations get that others don't about cyber compliance. In the security news, don't expose your supercomputer, authentication bypass, and command injection for the win. Just patch it using OS query against you, massive credential stuffing, backdoors in Harmony, looking at Android. So basically, I'm licensing my printer, hacking a Tesla, injecting keystrokes over Bluetooth, and remembering the work of David L. Mills. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
In the ever-present threat of cyber attacks, even a simple wrong click can spell disaster. ThreatLocker built endpoint protection so you can operate a zero-trust security posture built on a default deny. ThreatLocker allows you to control what runs and what those applications can do, access, and how they interact. Don't let your trusted applications be used against you. For comprehensive protection against evolving threats, turn to ThreatLocker Cyber Heroes at securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker. Identity is at the core of every great digital experience. Ping Identity's solutions support the scale, flexibility, and resiliency required by enterprise-level IT teams for lasting digital transformation. With 99.99% uptime and over 3 billion identities under management, they're the only identity vendor that's proven to champion the scale, performance, and security of large enterprises. That's why Ping Identity champions your unique identity needs. They give you the tools to offer your users the right access at the right times, no matter how they connect with you. Visit securityweekly.com/Ping Identity to learn more.
Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. Welcome to the show. Hey, I want to introduce you to my good friend. He's a guy that just bought a thesaurus and all the pages were blank. He has no words to describe how angry he is. Mr. Paul Asadoorian.
Coming to you in a super low definition, compliments of Darth Vader himself. It's Paul's Security Weekly, episode number 814, being recorded on January 24th, 2024, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left, Mr. Larry Pesce.
How's it going?
It's going good, man. I got my Proxmark 3 working.
Yeah. You were telling me you had problems with that last week.
I know, I didn't bring all the toys to the set,
okay.
But I also have my Flipper Zero connected to my Steam Deck. If that's not the nerdiest thing I've said in a while, because you can put the Q Flipper Linux application and then control your Flipper from your Steam Deck. Yep. I'm not sure why I want to do that, but being a nerd, I'm like, I need to. I must do this because I can.
Because you can.
Mr. Josh Marpet is here with us. Josh, welcome.
Yeah, that's definitely the nerdiest thing I've heard in a little while. I mean,
you almost like you had no words, Josh. You could have borrowed Paul's thesaurus.
Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us. Jeff, welcome.
Happy to be here, albeit virtually.
Yes.
We actually had snow last week. We had snow days. It was so much fun. I got to watch my grandkids do virtual school, which all you people that have had kids through COVID are used to it, but it was the first time for me, and it was hilarious.
It is. It can be entertaining. Miss Mandy Logan.
Extremely entertaining.
Mandy Logan is here with us. Mandy, welcome.
Good evening. And yeah, definitely everybody's using that thesaurus because I've heard nerdier things recently, but that, I don't understand. Your Flipper Zero to your Steam Deck? Like, why?
I know, right? I was like, I must do this. Yes. And then I connected it. I finally got it connected, and then it told me it didn't have permissions to the serial port. And then I ran out of time, and I'm old, and using the virtual keyboard on the Steam Deck is really, really awkward. So I will get it sorted, though. I will get it sorted. I promise. For next week. I feel like
that's useful is like a $300 haircut for you.
What's that?
That's as useful as a $300 haircut for you.
Yeah, pretty much. Because I wear a hat and I don't have much hair anymore. Thanks for reminding me, Mandy. Join the Security Weekly Discord channel to chat with us throughout the live show every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You can visit securityweekly.com/Discord even to receive an invite, and join our community. Phew, that was a mouthful for some reason. Matt Coose is here with us. He's a longtime IT and cybersecurity executive with extensive experience in operational cybersecurity and large-scale security and risk management programs. After graduating from West Point, Matt served as an Army pilot and worked with both large and small businesses in the private sector before transitioning to government. Prior to founding Qmulos, he served as the senior executive and director of federal network security at the Department of Homeland Security. I said that all out because I think that's an amazing title with a lot of words in it. There, he led the transformation of FISMA across the executive branch of the U.S. government. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys. So glad to be here with y'all.
Matt, how did you get your start? Tell the story of how you get your start in information security.
Yeah, so I guess I was in the Army way back when, and we didn't have IT people. So I was the kind of the junior guy on the staff, and my boss wanted to network his computer to the printer across the way. So I had to kind of figure out networking and learn all kinds of stuff.
So naturally, he came to the pilot and was like, "Hey, can you help me get the printer on the network?"
The only
yeah,
smart.
Unfortunately, I was at a cab squadron, so all the senior guys were armor guys, and I was the junior pilot guys that got beat up. So yeah, it's logical.
You drew the short straw, as it were. Fix my printer, right? It's every IT person's nightmare. Fix my printer.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah, I grew up in Northern Virginia, so a lot of my buddies were going to, we're at AOL at the time, and .com was going crazy, and I really just kind of lucked into it, being an Army guy, and then kind of getting out and moving back home. So,
and then talk about your work with the government, within the government. What was your position, and what did you do?
Yeah, so when I got back to DHS, this was after the bubble burst. I essentially was in charge of kind of revamping FISMA, as you mentioned. So,
and what for our audience, what is FISMA?
Yeah, so FISMA is kind of a law, but it basically requires all the federal agencies in the executive branch to basically do cyber, have a CISO, and back then it was really completing a bunch of checklists and security requirements and all that kind of stuff. And so I tried to sort of transition that from kind of being a paper-based exercise into more of a technical exercise. And focus on really more of the technical controls and helping agencies to implement those.
Are there other compliance standards that kind of fall under FISMA, Matt?
Yeah, so FISMA really points to NIST, SP 853. Yeah, so that's kind of
okay.
Yeah, that's the main sort of control catalog that is required to be implemented.
Fine. Just ignore FedRAMP. Just ignore it. It's okay. Nobody minds.
Yeah. So what's funny is the FedRAMP standard actually got developed in my office. I think it was Matt Goodrich at the time. We were kind of brainstorming. He was kind of running it, but we started sort of looking at the technical controls and what we should be requiring for government cloud providers. So that was a kind of an interesting time back then.
So Matt, it begs the question, because now we're already talking about compliance, right? We've kind of thrown your background to the wind, and we're just digging right into compliance. But we haven't had a good, healthy compliance discussion on the show in a while.
Ever.
And interestingly enough, though, I'm presenting on the CSF 2.0 tomorrow in a webinar, right? Mostly about the supply chain requirements in the new CSF. But for our audience, what's the difference and/or the relationship between 853 and the NIST CSF 2.0, or NIST CSF in general, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, I view it as just sort of a subset. Like 853 is a monster catalog of controls. And then you've got, CSF has kind of pulled a few different controls, categorized them differently, but very similar. I mean, it's just kind of a subset of things that are required. And I kind of view CMMC similarly, FedRAMP as well. So a lot of the standards that are out there are really sort of subsets or can be mapped to NIST 853.
So CMMC is mapped to 853 or CSF or both?
So
171.
Yeah, 171 is where
now it's just a lot of numbers and acronyms being thrown around. I can tell you worked in the military and government, Matt.
Yeah, ultimately,
I was drinking wine. Let me grab the scotch real quick.
You're gonna need something stronger for that.
This is why you haven't had a podcast on compliance, I'm sure.
Well, in particular, federal compliance.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But so the way I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong and or fill in the details, that CMMC is going to rely on stuff like CSF, particularly 2.0, that will eventually have some teeth, right? This is one of the ones that may actually, kind of like PCI, have some teeth. If you're going to do business as a contractor for the federal government, you must abide by these standards. You're nodding your head yes. So I'm actually sounding like I know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
First time for everything.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the teeth come in where they connect it to the acquisition process. So like, yeah, that's really where, folks, companies that want to companies that want to, provide services to the government have to attest to their compliance against these standards. And in order to bid on contracts, you've got to meet those requirements. So yeah, definitely
so
good.
let me ask the like a silly question about attestation. Is that like, what happens if can you lie? What happens if you lie? Is there a checks and balances, or
they haven't done it yet, Paul? So they haven't figured out where all the loopholes are yet.
Right.
Give them a chance.
Yeah, there are like three PAOs who are folks that come in and assess those organizations.
Okay, so similar to PCI, right? An assessor comes in and assesses, which
right.
I like. I actually like that model a lot, because I kind of, we're going for some organizations go for certifications. What's the one for the cloud?
FedRAMP?
Like a FedRAMP as an example, right? And then you go, everyone has to have this, and I'm like, yeah, but there's a process to make exceptions. And I feel like when Jeff, you describe your PCI work, like there's a human to help you gauge those exceptions, right? And exceptions are okay.
In theory, sometimes, but that's only a small subset of companies that have to do PCI, which is part of the problem, is that there's right. so much. There's assumption that there's a third party that's doing that, but not everybody is required to engage
the third party, right?
And so they don't, and that's where the wheels.
And so CMMC describe that for me, Matt. Is that a similar kind of process?
It is, yeah. I mean, it's still being finalized, but at least I think the control sets are published now. But yeah. So it's you prepare for it. You get an assessor to come in, look at your stuff, and then you can make your attestations based on that. But I guess the other part of it is that we are seeing lawsuits happen now where folks for years have been attesting to these things and just it wasn't reality, and so they're getting sued, and CISOs are going to jail, and I'm sure you seeing some of that stuff.
There was a university, at least one university that we covered, Matt. I forget which one it was, but they did exactly what you said, right? Attested that, yep, we got all the stuff. And did they get hacked or audited or both? I don't remember.
I forget what kind. Yeah, I thought it was a breach, but I'm not sure. Yeah, it was. I think it was Pennsylvania actually, but yeah, it's happening more and more. Corporate America. And you're seeing a lot of whistleblowers now making a lot of money because they know how kind of fraught with false claims some of that stuff can be. So it's an interesting time right now with the compliance. The mandates are kind of coming out more and more, and then they're being enforced in really stringent ways. So.
And what about downstream suppliers, right?
Oh, don't even get started on supply chain. Oh my God. It's a goddamn clusterfuck. Okay, let's be honest here.
Josh, I haven't even asked the question yet.
No, just supply chain in general, because with CMMC,
just bear with me for a moment. You got the federal government. I'm a contractor. I do business with the federal government. I read CMMC, and then I do all the things. I attest like I'm doing all these things, right? Then I do business with someone else, right? That makes the screws, makes the whatever downstream supplier from me. Do they also have to be certified to the same or different level that I have to certify to?
So it could be a different level depending on, I think, the size of those companies, but yeah, essentially the prime's got to ensure their suppliers are compliant as well.
So it does have a downstream.
It does.
And you're right, for larger suppliers, that's where I think when we first started talking about CMMC, we were talking about, for some reason, like I'm watching The Sopranos, and now social media's figured out that I like Sopranos, so it shows me Sopranos clips all the time, and you get the landscaper, and there's like one social media video that I think was on Instagram where it's every clip where it's with the landscaper. If you ever watched The Sopranos, right? But I think about the government has to contract out landscapers. And so do they have to test the CMMC, and then like where they go buy their gas or have maintenance on their machines, they also have to attest, right?
Well, that kind of goes with my question to ask, like, does it get down to like hardware parts as well, or is there a cutoff where perhaps it's just physical components and suppliers don't have to be certified?
Yeah, I think it depends on. I mean, ultimately, it depends on the acquisition and what they put in the requirements. But it could. I mean, it can go. Yeah, it definitely depends on.
Yeah, Josh lives in this world with you, Matt, as well.
I wrote chunks of CMMC, so if you don't mind, I'll take this one. That's okay. Every contract has a prime and multiple subs, typically. Every chunk that is going to go to a prime or a sub has a level associated with it. In CMMC 2.0, there's level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1, our classic example for level 1 was actually a guy who mows the lawns on base, or somebody who stocks the soda machines on base. Level 3 was the big primes, Lockheed, Raytheon, etc. And level 2 was somebody who may make the screws on a weapon system, okay, the chunks of a weapon system or whatever. Not that most weapon systems are classified, but if you don't know what it's going into, you're like, I make a screw, I know it goes to a weapon system, I have no idea which one, I have no idea where it goes, I just
made
know
it to
I make
this
a screw
specification, yeah.
You're level 2. You have controlled unclassified information, but you don't have classified information. Okay, that's a level 2. A contract can have 500 level 1s, 500 level 2s, and a couple of level 3s or 1 or 2 level 3s, whatever. As a matter of fact, it's interesting because they've changed it because level 1 is now going to be self-assessment. So if you're mowing the lawn, you don't need to assess, you don't need to attest to where you got your gas from, okay? There are 17 controls. It's basically, do you have passwords? Yes, you're good. You know, level 3 has all of 800.171 plus some more, a few more controls. We called it the Delta 20. And then level 2 is a subset of 800.171. But the interesting thing is level 1 is a self-assessment. Level 3 is assessed by the government, DCMA, DIBCAC. By the way, the joke about them is they've had their senses of humor surgically removed. Okay. And level 2 is a C3PAO, a certified third-party assessment organization. The problem there is that C3PAOs are not getting churned out fast enough because there's like 200,000 companies that are going to need to be certified, at least 30,000 of which are going to be level 2. And there's like 40 or 50 assessment companies right now.
So Matt, what do you think of Josh's work on CMMC? You're nodding your head yes, you're in agreement with this, or do you have some bones to pick? It's okay if you do. We disagree with Josh all the time, just for because.
Yeah. But. No, I think that's all. That's obviously he knows his stuff, and that's accurate. But yeah, it's I think that's just how it's laid out. So it's the same issue they had with FedRAMP in terms of 3PAOs. I mean, cranking out enough of those folks to do the job for the amount of cloud providers we have. But yeah.
Wait, so what is a C3PO? What is that?
Third-party assessment organization. They're the
C3PAO is for CMMC, a 3PAO or 3PAO is for FedRAMP.
And what about C3PO? He's a robot from Star Wars.
Dude,
all PCI has is AOC and SAQ.
I'm sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
I said all PCI has is SAQ and AOC. Y'all keep going. I'm going to keep drinking scotch.
But now, describe for our audience. Describe FedRAMP in relation to like everything else we're talking about right now.
I mean, just to keep it simple, it's the same concept, right? So it's a set of controls they've defined for cloud providers to adhere to, and they OMB and DHS kind of created a joint board to certify 3PAOs to go assess those organizations against those controls so that they can provide services to the federal government. Yeah. It's a very similar construct as CMMC.
Gotcha. These are treacherous waters to navigate if you're not familiar with all the ins and outs of compliance.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at it, I always kind of boil it down simply. Just it's controls you have to implement at whatever level you're at, and you either self-attest or you have to get a certifier or an auditor to come in and validate, and then you've got your attestation you can make on your contracts. That's essentially what it comes down to. Just depends on what controls are required for whatever level contract you're bidding on.
The fun part is
there a slight... I'm sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
Thank you. This is actually kind of funny. Right now, under the revised final draft, which just came out a little while ago, but was leaked a few months ago because they put it on their website without controlling it. never mind. You have to be both FedRAMP and CMMC certified to sell to the federal government a cloud service cloud service, which means you get double whammied with certification costs and for no availability of extra cost in your or extra profit in your product. So it's bad.
Is that and that's true of any, like we say cloud providers, but it's also basically like a software provider. I mean, if you have stuff, right? Any cybersecurity companies, right, have to, for example,
depends industrial base in general. Yeah. They've gotta,
so they got to get doubly certified now.
Yep.
That's if they're doing cloud services, is that right?
That's true. That's true. If they're doing cloud services, they have to be both FedRAMP and CMMC. But how much shrink wrap software are we buying these days?
Yeah, true.
That's true. Well, I don't know. A lot of government military agencies, though, won't do cloud services. I know there's many software providers that still maintain an on-premises version in addition to a cloud version because of that. And if you want problems, like that's, as a software provider, it's a tricky one. I mean, it depends on your stack, but it's tricky, right?
Yeah.
All right. So, given all this compliance stuff that we've kind of, I think it's a good foundation that we've built. So, what are smart CISOs and mature organizations? Those are two different things, though, Matt. Let's start with smart CISOs. When smart CISOs go look at all of this compliance stuff, what are they doing different?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very complicated space, as you all know. I mean, cyber defense in general is a beast, right? So they have to do a lot right, to kind of to be successful. The ones that we see they're doing it right, or one of the trends that we're seeing that's important, I think, to start doing, given the mandates are coming out. There's more personal accountability. There's these attestations. It's getting pretty serious. Is we're seeing, budgets are always an issue, right? So where we're focused is helping those CISOs that kind of get all that, make the most of their dollars, right? Compliance for so many years has been just this paperwork drill, right? And you spend tons of money on kind of butts and seats, checking the box, collecting data manually, looking through that sort of statically, very historically. And then you don't get much security value out of that. And so the folks we're working with realize kind of the trend towards like real time and doing that in an automated way, and are kind of connecting the dots between what compliance really means and the intent of compliance and actual true security or cyber defense. And so they're really trying to align those budgets more smartly. Instead of having a separate, compliance group, they're spending tons of money on bodies, and then a security group, they're spending, dollars on technical things. Bringing those two together to really accomplish both of those requirements, simultaneously. And that includes merging the personnel and funding as well. So that's one big thing that we're seeing is kind of a difference maker to kind of get through all this. It's kind of past the time of having the budgets for paperwork drills. You really need to bring your compliance programs into the future and kind of do that stuff in an automated way. So
what you're seeing is that merging, Matt, right? Because I think you can be compliant and not secure for sure, right?
True.
But you flip it and you go the other way around. Like, yeah, we think we're secure, but you could also not be compliant, and that's where we have issues with things, right? Like, no, wait, I'm secure, but the compliance thing says very specific things sometimes, and you're like, but that doesn't matter to me, and here's the except, right?
Right. Yeah. And there's other nuances with that. Like, I mean, a lot of times the SOCs don't have the context necessarily that maybe some of the compliance folks do. So being able to create those views of kind of what those controls look like, the state of those controls at any given time, and then being able to add the context from maybe not the security team, but other teams in the organization to say, should these folks, are these folks on vacation? Are they still with the company? Should they be logging in from different places? Should they be doing these activities? Like, there's a lot of context that, centralized groups, don't necessarily have, and that are really important to, on the compliance side as well as the security side. So it really does make sense to bring those teams together and get all that good information sort of automated and enriched with that additional information. So.
But also, like when Jeff and I worked for Tenable, right, we talked about continuous monitoring. It's very much at play here because, for example, there's a policy that it comes down, and you're like, well, your screen has to lock every 15 minutes, and your hard drive needs to be encrypted. Okay, so we do the compliance thing. That's true today. But like, what happens when I rebuild my workstation, or I go in and I change that? That's saying, well, that's super annoying. I'm going to change that. Is the like? Do many of these compliance standards have a thing that says you have to monitor if these controls change and then report on it? I would imagine is a part of that, right?
Yeah, and that's where we're focused on the technical controls. So just like you described it, that's, a specific couple of controls. There's, many of those throughout these standards, all of which need to be continuously monitored because anything can change on the network at any given time, right? So being able to monitor that stuff in near real time is crucial to actually ensuring those controls are in place and effective over time as things evolve. So that's to me, that's the essence of continuous monitoring and what folks need to be building towards.
Man, do you have a question?
I do. I have a two-part question. First, and I want to talk about the role of the CISO, since we were talking about smart CISOs here. And going back to the very first hacker meetup I ever went to, when I was gaining information on cybersecurity, information security as a whole, I was directly told by several very capable practitioners, they recommended the CISO role because they said it was basically all about terminology, and that it was basically having an English major would make you more qualified to be a CISO than having security or network knowledge. Do you feel like that's adequate, like that's a correct summary, or that downplays the role of the CISO? And then I have a follow-up to that.
I mean, my personal feeling that definitely downplays the role of CISO. I mean, I think it's important to have good communication skills and be able to translate some of the stuff, the technical lingo and even the compliance lingo to the board and so forth. But that's only going to get you so far. I mean, ultimately, you got to, what you're attesting to your personal, you have personal liability in many cases for some of this stuff. So you really want to be able to understand kind of where that information comes from. Are these controls actually in place? It's great to be able to articulate that, but to be able to prove it is more important. And it does require some level of understanding of the processes behind that and how that information is collected and what you're attesting to. So I'd say both are pretty important.
Absolutely. And then it brings me to a quote of yours from a Forbes article, and it says that there was a lot of paperwork they were having to write and report on while spending less time on defending their networks. And this was part of why you were interviewed discussing about starting Qmulos. And I'm curious, for all of our illustrious CISOs and support people that are listening, what information can you provide on the hard numbers that Qmulos allows paperwork to decrease for the CISO?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's pretty hard to quantify, but they're always going to be the non-technical controls, right? So you're going to have to do some paperwork, and that's unfortunate, but that's sort of the way the standards are written today. There's a whole nother sort of thing we can get into around like regulators and what they should really focus on and try and get away from some of that paperwork stuff. But you do have to do some of that no matter what. But I think with the the capabilities that we're really trying to get in place is it's more about the automation side, and not just automating the workflow, but automating all the labor involved in like typical compliance activities. So you don't want to be collecting bothering all your technical folks, all your admins to provide this data to you in spreadsheets and data calls, and then having to compile all that and sort of go through it, analyze it, report it. It's a much more efficient and effective way to automate that stuff and use it for real security. And then you can just kind of as a byproduct report on compliance. So to us, it's like, I think you're going to have some paperwork, but to the extent you can automate a lot of that manual work that goes into what I just described, you'll be much further ahead on the compliance side, but you'll also be better security wise, because now you're monitoring this data coming from machines in real time, contextualized to the controls and what the requirements are. And you can actually see when controls go out of compliance and act on them. So that's the ultimate goal for us is yes, we'll reduce some of that labor and the expense associated with that, but really we're enabling security to happen in near real time just through the lens of these technical controls. So does that help? Does that answer your question, Maddie?
It definitely does, and I think all of it is very, it's logical. We understand there's always going to be paperwork, there's always going to be that side. I was curious if you had any, I guess in follow-up to that, like any field response from persons using your platform that are saying like, oh yeah, we have noticed this change in the amount of documentation.
Yeah. So funny enough, like we've had folks that are on the receiving end of those data calls from the compliance teams, more on the SOC side, the admin side, bring us in to set these things up, because really we're saving them probably the most time from doing these surveys, and data calls can happen like multiple times a year. And so they don't want to be in that job. They don't want to be, run reports and pulling data off and sending them out to different folks, every couple of weeks. So yeah, we've definitely had a lot of good feedback around that. And even folks bringing us in from that side to get these capabilities in place and provide a window to their compliance team into the evidence they need in an automated way. So yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of that.
Matt, many of the cybersecurity folks will look at compliance and go, that's not enough for security, right? Now that I'm older and maybe a tiny bit wiser, I tend to go the other way, right? And it's more of a discussion point, but I tend to go the other way. And so I want to use a control as an example that I've taken issue with, right? And that is, there's probably multiple standards that say this. Everyone's hard drive has to be encrypted, right? And now I think they're saying that because the technology to do that has become pretty easy and pretty standard. And so the compliance standards are like, we just need to do that across the board. And I'm like, I guess I'm one of the few people, I don't know how many people are raising their hand going like, hold on a second. I've got operational impact I have to take into account. I've also got a secure data center that's monitored 24/7. There's an alarm. It's up on the second floor. There's a locked door. There's people here like pretty late, right? Like, what are you protecting against? Like, what's the threat that we're protecting against in doing that versus the operational risk? Like, what are your thoughts on like how when compliance gets like overbearing in certain scenarios, such as the one I described?
Yeah, I think that definitely can happen in some cases. I mean, you're always going to have exceptions that are needed based on the operational requirements of the organization. But the reverse is true too, right? So like you can, and again, I go back to like define the control the way you need it to work in your organization, right? A lot of these controls are defined in such a way that you have the flexibility to add in what they call ODPs, organizationally defined parameters, where you can set different things, different sort of criteria or constraints or allowances within the controls. And the bottom line is like a lot of these basic technical controls aren't monitored or managed in real time. So it can work both ways. Like if you can not be doing some of the technical compliance things and really be exposed to have a lot of risk because you don't think they're important. They seem pretty foundational, but they're not done. They're exploited all the time. And I think the reverse is true too.
But I think that's it needs to be a conversation too, because also like the screen locking every 15 minutes. I'm like, what people are working from home? Like, seriously?
Right, and that's a configurable. That's an example of an ODP that
ODP. So ODP is the term. So when I go to the
you know me.
When I go to the it's also Rhode Island has an ODP soccer thing, which my son does ODP training, which is very much. When you said that, I was like, "Whoa, wait, what are we talking about?"
Namespace for the show.
But what does ODP in the compliance stand for again?
Organizationally defined parameter.
Organizationally defined parameter. I love that. That's
it's just a blank. Like in the control, you read the control and it says you reset your password every blank minutes, or lock your screen every blank minutes, and the organization fills that in. And if it doesn't work for some, you can change that to suit your needs.
But can you have, can you have like pockets? Can you make it more like a policy that says, so like the screen lock is kind of a great example, right? Like on laptops where they're moving around, yes. If the machine's going to stay within the, the dwelling, probably not, right?
Yep.
So you can make exceptions like we should allow organizations to tune it. But again, we have to balance that with, I don't want to allow organizations to like tune themselves out of like oh, you don't need passwords anymore. We're like, why would your password's 1, 2, 3, 4 all the time? Why does it need to be anything different, right?
Yeah, they can and should be set exactly like you described. Like and it comes down to like the system that you're talking about, right? So you can put all your laptops into a system boundary and set standards for that, or you can carve it up any way you want, as long as you can monitor and manage that according to those different assets.
Employee does a podcast and screen locking significantly impairs his ability.
Exactly.
Wait, now we're making too much. You don't want to get. So my point with that was you don't want to get too specific with your exceptions either.
True. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And I mean, again, as long as you're monitoring it, right? It's the whole point is
Right.
set to what's operationally feasible, and then if you're monitoring, you should find those exceptions when they happen, and if something you can monitor other controls that will tell you if something's going wrong. So that's kind of the point of having the basic set of technical controls sort of being continuously monitored and then being able to make those risk decisions on the fly.
I have a bit of a weird
Hold on. I want to go Jeff. I want to go Jeff and then Josh.
Yeah, because I think Josh was moving on. I wanted to play out this scenario, the screen lock scenario a little bit further. Who in the organization makes the risk-based decision of how long the screen lock should be, and what do they base that on? And what does all this alphabet soup provide in the way of
Guidance,
direction or guidance or recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, so it varies by organization, but typically, like, there's an ISM, like pretty much the system owner, information system security manager can define those for the systems that they manage, and it typically is very system specific. So that's where it gets done. Most organizations have approval processes for that. So if they'll have a top level sort of baseline ODP set, and if you want to make exceptions to that, you can do that. You submit your requests and get approved for that. The hard part, it comes in when it gets down to the implementation of those and monitoring those. So you want to have a solution, and this is where the legacy GRC capabilities just don't even come close to being able to do this. But so you can monitor this set of assets against this ODP, and you can monitor this set of assets against these controls and these ODPs. That's all possible to do. But so that's kind of the important part, is being able to actually implement and monitor those things without all the manual sort of overhead that would go with that. The defining the piece is just something you have to do up front, no matter what. So does that make sense?
Yep.
Jeff's not immediately disagreeing with you, so I'll take that agreement.
It's not that I'm disagreeing. I just I like the world that I play in. This sounds very daunting and rife for abuse.
Well, it's different from PCI in a lot of. I've noticed in what we're talking about, Jeff, differs a lot from what you've talked about here on the show on PCI. Because I learned everything I need or want to learn about PCI from Jeff. So
from me, yep.
And so if I'm wrong, it means Jeff's wrong. Basically, I just passed the buck.
He passes the wrongness along.
That's right.
Well, and for context, Paul, in PCI speak, it's not a screen lock; it's a session idle timeout that has to be set for 15 minutes. And in the old world where we had workstations and we would get up and go to get coffee or go to the little boy's room, how many of us ran over and took advantage of people that didn't lock their screen? But
turned it upside down, turned assistants on, everything on their screen.
Right.
High contrast was a very popular one. Everything in accessibility was popular.
My favorite one was create a text file and just put Paul was here. I changed some things. Good luck figuring it out. And sometimes I'd change stuff and sometimes I wouldn't. I would just leave them guessing.
My favorite one was change the .login to have the first command be log off, and then watch them try to figure that out. But when I'm hearing, it's subjective by system owner, it's like, oh, I can see all the Unix and system admins it's got to be 4 hours. I can't have that. And it sounds like they can do that. But, when are we just enabling continued poor poor security hygiene and lazy practices where
and that's definitely true, but that's where the definition piece comes in, right? So and that's why organizations almost all of them have that top level set defined, and if you want an exception to that, you gotta argue a case for it. But there are legitimate cases for making exceptions for some of those things. I mean, there's all kinds of different mission critical systems that, because of some environment or other compensating controls might merit, some of those changes. So it's nice to know that there's flexibility there. But at the end of the day, like I said, it's the definition piece is, needs to be argued and defined up front and maybe exceptions made. But ultimately it's about, monitoring what you think is required for good security and then making sure you adhere to that. I think that's the key.
So one last question before I yield the floor to the gentleman from Pennsylvania. I use the term Pennsylvania loosely. And
gentlemen.
So, well, that too, but I didn't want to go for the obvious. So, I mean, my take on all the NIST stuff and everything we're talking about has always been, and where I see PCI being extremely different, is 853. It's got everything in the kitchen sink in it, but there's an expectation that somebody knows to go through it and pick out what's relevant, which I think to some degree is probably what all the different things are that have come along since then that are subsets that we described earlier. Try to help people kind of weed through it, whereas PCI just kind of boiled it down to a very specific type of data set. But I don't know. PCI has 6 goals, 12 major requirements, and companies for 20 years have struggled to follow that. I'm just really skeptical that all this works for the government, where there's equal amounts of non-expertise, non-institutional knowledge. I mean, even the exception process that you're describing. What is the training? What is the criteria for, okay, you have a baseline, whatever you called it, the initial setting, and you're allowed to have the flexibility, but who's getting trained on the criteria to know that, yeah, you really can't make it 60 minutes. It can't really be more than 30 minutes or, whatever the number is for whatever the reasons are. I don't know. I don't envy anybody that has to wade through all this, frankly.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of people just accept the default organizational settings,
Right.
But yeah, that's the easy path. But ISOs are the ones that kind of do that. Information system security officers are the ones that actually kind of make those decisions or propose those exceptions.
My fear, Matt, is that some of those are more annoying to the user in operations than they are actually effective at mitigating a threat. Right. And as we're picking on the screen lock thing, but like to all the pen testers out there or anyone that's done pen testing, how many times has a screen lock prevented you from doing something? I'll extend that further, which actually does have I think an impact, Jeff, session timeout, right? Because there's been times, so that actually would have prevented a time on a pen test where I gained access to the BMC, got into the console session, and someone was already logged in. So had there been a console session timeout on that Linux system, it would have stopped me. But since that person was logged in, I didn't have to log in. I was already root just by getting access to the management controller. So in that situation, it does make sense. I think like a Windows or Mac OS screen lock, if your attacker is in that close physical proximity to your computers, the bash bunny still and stuff like that still works on the USB port, even if it's locked. That's true, right? Is that true? That's actually a really good question. It is true, right? It doesn't matter because like I'm
fairly certain that's correct.
Or does it depend on the setting? The answer to our questions matter almost always. Like it depends, right?
No.
There could be policy that I'm not aware of, right? But there's also been attacks where it doesn't matter if it's locked or not, like DMA attacks and stuff like that. So, I mean, there's also like if the attacker is going to take your device. Also, it doesn't really matter what you put in that device. If an attacker has physical access or possession of that device, I mean, it's pretty much game over. I mean, especially like the people I work with in my day job. I mean, I've watched my coworkers on YouTube videos with basically like 3.5 minutes worth of access, modify the BIOS. Like,
All right. So I have to belabor this just a little bit longer, Paul.
yeah, let's belabor it. I love belaboring.
When the session timeout rule was created 20 years ago, sessions were remote sessions from admins at a workstation logging into the production servers in the production environment, which in theory had some layers of protection. So, and it was not a matter of physical access. It's if I could get to the the admin workstation. Oh, and there's a session that's enabled.
Right. Agreed.
And can hijack it. So it wasn't necessarily physical access. Now, how often is the bad guys doing it like that anymore? I mean, the times have changed. And I'm sitting here thinking, and we accept all the time the Microsoft screensaver for the session timeout requirement because, well, at least the screen's locked. And even because, it's a VPN session, it's an RDP session, it's, haven't seen Telnet at least in a month or two, secure shell, putty, session. But, the idea is you don't want to leave those avenues into the really critical systems just open for the taking because you're expanding your attack plane. And where the bad guys could get, could impact things.
Let's belabor it even more. I mean, they make like mouse. They make mouse jigglers and software. I used to run one on Mac OS that would jiggle the mouse so the screen wouldn't lock.
Caffeine
wouldn't lock.
You gotta like weigh these options, right? Like what are we trying to protect against?
So it would never sleep. The tool was called Caffeine.
Caffeine. That's what it was. Yeah, I was gonna say it was coffee, but it was caffeine. You're right. Yes, on Mac I used to run it.
Perfect name.
Yeah, and I mean, all this discussion is good. Like, the question is like, what controls could you define, like technically, to prevent some of these things? Right, you're not going to stop them all, but maybe you stop them at some point along the line. And if you can define those controls and implement them to monitor over, in real time, that's kind of what you're after, right? So at least get visibility into, what's happening and what controls might mitigate some of that stuff. I think PCI is an interesting example. It's a little more. My perspective is a little more cut and dry versus like the diversity of systems you see in the federal government, and it is complicated. Like there's no way around it. But I think starting with baselines, starting with enterprise defined controls and parameters is a place to start. Get monitoring that stuff, and then you can tweak that as you go. I mean, if you want to lock some more things down tighter, or you want to change control to be more specific, or whatever, you can do that. But folks aren't even close to doing any of that. Like, I mean, a lot of the organizations that we talk with are still.
Well, no, but I think, Josh, before you go, I think, Matt, what you're hinting at is there's a maturity model too, right? Like we belabored the point about a screen lock, but we could very well be referencing an organization that hasn't done basic patches across their entire environment, right? We're like, a screen lock is not going to matter to you, unless you're implying.
I dare say government agencies outside of the DoD are probably less mature than the average private sector company these days. Anybody disagree with that?
That's a broad statement. I don't know.
It is a broad statement, but broadly, anybody disagree?
Broadly inaccurate?
Broadly Northwestern European.
When it's broad, it's hard to be wrong. Right?
I mean, I think,
like,
I think
say that again, Jeff.
The buckshot is really going in a very wide pattern.
I'd say
Jeff, say it again, please.
There's a lot of things that are kind of missed in every flavor of organization. I mean, people are still using like legacy GRC tools and not doing much of this at all, not applying any context.
You mean Excel?
That's good.
In many cases, that's the ultimate basic, but that does exist. All spreadsheets,
Sorry, Josh.
So let me
go ahead.
Let me ask you a nasty question, okay? Compliance is at heart useful, but a lot of people think it's just a pain in the ass. However, one of the biggest things right now is that we need to do compliance cross-organizationally, okay? There is no choice. The supply chain is real. We've had supply chain attacks that have come down and smacked us. We need to do security as well as compliance cross-organizationally. I don't think anybody will disagree with that.
Yep.
So how do we do it so that we can, what's your opinion on having dashboards or something so that I can see that my partners in my supply chain and my value chain are actually doing their job properly?
Yeah, and that's that's the gist of what folks need to do in terms of that maturity curve, right? So again, to me, if you're a company and you're relying on a report that your suppliers are giving you, even FedRAMP in this case, like that's all they require. That's really insufficient, because you go into those suppliers and you see what they're actually monitoring technically, like in any near real-time sense, and it's very small fraction of kind of the technical controls that would really help their security defenses. So I think the answer to me is just get to that maturity curve, both in your own organization and force your suppliers to do the same. And it does come down to that monitoring technical evidence in near real time, and then adding the context that you need to make sure if it's good or bad stuff you're seeing. And that's a drastic oversimplification, but that's really the capability that folks need to have. That's when I was at DHS.
Companies do that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we're definitely seeing companies do that, and it's a journey for sure. It's not immediate. You can't do that immediately, but a lot of folks have big data platforms. They're pulling in a lot of information, a lot of data from different devices, and there's a lot of good, rich information out there that can provide insight into the controls. They just need you contextualize it into the control requirements, and you can start knocking those off one by one, and you're drastically improving your capabilities. We started when I was at DHS. I don't know if you've heard of the CDM program, Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation, but we started that with the White House when I was there, and that's kind of what the aim of that is to get towards more real time continuous monitoring of really critical technical controls. It's not it's still got a ways to go, but I think we're definitely seeing folks do that on both the private sector side and as well as the federal side.
Nice.
I know Mandy has a question, but I can't remember my question now.
So Mandy has a question.
Mandy has a question.
I do. And so I wanted to ask about on Qmulos, how and why is the option to have augmented reality monitoring part of, like, what helps make that the security and regulatory compliance more of a leading indicator?
What do you mean? So
well, I'm curious.
I'm not getting the augmented reality part. What do you mean?
Right, on the list of attributes for Qmulos, let me get back to it. It shows that you offer augmented reality integration.
Mandy always comes up with the stumpers.
That's like marketing put that on our website.
Are we sure on the right? Yeah.
They did that on a Friday when we had beer in the office. They're like, let's just put augmented reality on the website and see if anyone notices. And Mandy was the first person to notice.
Yeah.
I just wonder how the integration there would actually help create the logs to be a predictive indicator in the securities.
I'm lost on that. What we. Yeah. I'm not sure. I'll have to double check if that's on our website or not, but like we use machine learning to do some of that. So like we'll detect anomalous, activity, for example, like in audit controls. So auditing user behaviors and activities and detecting anomalies in those things. So we do pull out some things to look at that are risky for some of your AU controls or audit related controls.
Matt, I want to ask you a question about compliance and like being more threat-based, right? Because we talked about compliance standards, we talked about compliance controls, we kind of picked on some specific controls and we're like, are these relevant or not based on operational risk? But now I'm working for an organization and they're like, Paul, we need to be secure. And like one of the first things I want to do is understand their business and understand the threats to their business, and maybe not even specifically like cyber threats, but let's just start with like the threats to the operations of your business, right? And then let's kind of dig down into, all right, what are some of the cybersecurity threats, and like how do you marry that to use that to drive some of your compliance? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I mean, you can take a couple different approaches. I mean, the simple approach is just sort of get some of those technical controls monitored, get the right data sets pulled in, map them to your systems, your controls, see what evidence you have, see if those controls are in place and effective over time. You can also map that data. That's kind of the good beauty of kind of big data platforms, is you can then also map that to like a MITRE ATT&CK framework. and see where those controls are actually preventing some of those behaviors that you might see on the threat side. So for us, we typically try and start with the compliance piece because that's who we really target. But it's useful in a bunch of ways to include kind of mitigating specific threats, and if you have big gaps on that side, you can focus on the controls that you need to put in place to mitigate some of that stuff.
I've always found it, and Jeff and Josh used to do a show, Security and Compliance Weekly, right? And I think one of the things that I gathered from that show was, they would always ask and talk about, like, how does security impact compliance? How does compliance impact security? And I was like, security and compliance have this very interesting relationship, right? And it's not one-dimensional at all. It's very much a dynamic relationship that they have with each other. And that's kind of what I hear you saying, Matt, right? It's like you gotta balance that relationship between security and compliance, and you exploit it to the best of your advantages, right? We exploit compliance to go, well, I really want to implement this control. No one's buying into it, but if I go to this compliance standard, it says that we should have it, so maybe I can use that, right? And the same thing with security. I go, well, compliance isn't good enough here. Like, this needs to be here based on this threat, right? And it's this complex relationship that I think we have to understand in order to be effective in securing our organizations.
Yeah, that's very well said. I've always viewed compliance very, very flexibly because, like, to your point, you can define a control, you can have custom controls, and it's still a control that you need to monitor, right? And that's encouraged, right? These standards are built, years ago, but there's a lot of them are still very valid in terms of the technical things they're required you to do. But there's lots of stuff they may not include that are more frequent, more frequent, threat based and so forth. So our approach to that is, and we've had customers do this, just define your control. What would you monitor to prevent that? What would you want to know about from what systems and what assets to prevent some of the attack vectors that you're seeing? You can do that. You can define that. You can implement it. You can pull in that data set. And you can monitor it, in a dashboard.
I like that, Matt, because it ties into our interview with Jared Atkinson from Spectre Ops that we did. Right? He was talking about it's not a compliance control necessarily, but it's an attack vector, okay? And like, how well are we protecting against the attack vector? There's a million ways that attackers can kind of variations on this attack vector. How well do we prevent against them, right? Now that it becomes control, it becomes something that we monitor. I think there's a compliance aspect to that, and there's also a technical controls aspect to that, right?
Yeah, and that's the ultimate maturity, right? When you're doing that, you are number one in the game because you're dynamically seeing the threat and you're defining controls. And the important thing is persisting those things because old threats can come back too. And so if you kind of get rid of the old stuff that's defined in whatever compliance framework, you might be opening yourself up. So you kind of continually build on that control set to keep ahead of the game.
Yeah, I feel like that gets us in trouble sometimes too, is now that, as we've progressed in cybersecurity and technology for the better part of 30 years, we go, oh, it's an old school kind of method. We don't need to worry about that. But you do, because attackers will be like, oh, like what's falling off? Like, what's the tail end that's falling off? Like, all that stuff is still valid, right?
Yep.
And we see that in logical controls. We see that in physical controls a lot of times too. Like, do I have to test for this older RFID technology? Well, yeah, you do.
Somehow that creeped into your, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and as a teaser for the next segment, and then we have, monolithic companies in the tech industry, falling to password spraying and not implementing two-factor authentication on some throwaway server somewhere.
Right.
Which is why we drink.
Yes.
What's the most popular password in the world? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Like,
I thought it was secret, sex, love, and that's
golf.
Just in the movies.
Golf, money. Right.
Although I don't know if anybody made it a news story. I saw an article a week or two ago where, because of the popularity of Taylor Swift, now Taylor Swift derivative passwords are becoming very popular, and so she's making a cybersecurity impact.
I'd argue she was already popular before she started popping up in NFL games, right? But it is true how that it actually increased her popularity, but also very interesting how it's creeping its way into passwords because it's top of mind for people. And a lot of the times password guessing is like what's top of mind, right? Like the age-old classic of whatever season it is in the year, right? Like what's fresh and new today.
I think I'll change my password to Great Googly Moogly.
I go change my
Who are the chefs?
Taylor Swift passwords.
Exactly.
We'll talk about that in the next segment. Matt,
Blank space.
Matt, are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Oh, I guess so. Yeah.
I like how I say that and I don't describe what it is, and all the guests are like, "Yeah, I'm totally gay." Like I earned your trust in this last hour. And you're like, "Yeah, whatever you want." It's 5 silly questions. There's no
I
right
think
or
we're
wrong.
out of time.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answer. So, Matt, 3 words to describe yourself.
Entrepreneurial, I guess. I guess very customer centric, and just have a burning desire to solve this security thing. I've been in the space for a while, and it's a very complex thing to do. So it's still fun, and I hope I can keep doing it for a little while longer.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Oof.
Compliance.
Death by compliance.
Yeah, I'll go with that one.
There you go. If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
God, man, these are hard. No, I need some help from the team.
I like I like to come up. So my secret hack to these questions is question number 3. What's the title of the book about yourself? Is a combination of question 1 and 2. You pick one thing from question 1 and then question 2, and you end up with the answer for question 3. That's my secret hack to these questions.
So that would be really interesting. And
If you said like curious and ice pick, your book would be like the curious ice pick killer.
Yeah. And see, I'm trying to buy you more time here. Like, so my 3 words to describe myself are tall, handsome, and a liar.
And then in a serial killer, what would be your weapon?
Cereal.
Yeah. So a serial liar is my book. Yeah. The life of a serial liar would be your book.
The life of a tall, handsome cereal.
Now, I
Thumbs
think
up,
it's
let him
kind
answer.
of on wings of compliance because you're from Pilot.
Oh, I love that, Mandy. Do you accept that as your answer, man?
I accept that 100%. Yeah. I want Manny to answer the rest of mine.
No, because now this is personal. What's
This
your
is where the rubber hits
This is
the
where
road.
rubber meets the
Next
road
question.
right here, Matt. What is your favorite hacker movie?
Oof.
It's War Games. Just
And why is it the one on my T-shirt?
Sneakers.
It's war games because I'm old.
There you go. Perfect. Matt, choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Man, golly, I'm not a big celebrity guy, but
Anyone from history. Yeah, it can be anyone.
And celebrity is loosely termed because someone could be a celebrity in your own mind.
Right.
no, I'd say like Alex Ovechkin and his wife, just because I'm a hockey fan and he's one of my main guys.
There you go. Matt, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
Awesome, guys. Thanks so much. It was fun.
With that, we'll take a short break. Come back with the security news. Stay tuned.